that's done. So I can get out of there. Okay. Okay. Oh, is he? Good afternoon, Sean. Hey, Sean, can you hear me okay?
I can sure hear it. Can you hear me?
Absolutely. I'm just waiting for David Gertz to get on, and then I hand over the meeting to him.
All right. Thank you, sir. Appreciate everything. Okay, I think I'm on the right track here. Let's see. There we go. Okay. Have I got audio, anybody?
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear. We're just waiting
Okay,
for David Gertz to show up.
okay, okay. I got the pipeline open and I stumble around a bit on these. So we get a look over your shoulder there, Keith, and see what you're reading on your bookshelf.
Sure. Have fun. Weeds of the West,
Well,
all
there you
sorts
go.
of thrilling
Exciting.
things.
I've been playing with these virtual backgrounds. This is obviously a geological piece there. They're kind of fun.
Well, and the one thing I've noticed, and I've been on a lot of Zoom meetings and actually 7 other platforms, is that the one thing that's kind of disturbing is there's just a limited sight distance on on people's actual picture, and the background sometimes uh, fades in and out as you actually fade in and out. Yeah.
This one's doing pretty good.
Yeah.
It's kind of magic, isn't it?
I hope the county has an internet connection.
About that. I got this one for my wife. It gives her a kind of some gravitas.
All right, it's 2:00, so we'll go ahead and get this meeting started. This is current Chairman Sean Moore. Before we start here, Moore, we'd just like to welcome you to the Planning Commission and look forward to working with you here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm excited about working on county issues as well.
All right, thank you. And just so everybody knows, I've got John Spiegelberg here with me at my residence. So we'll get the meeting going here. The first item that we usually do is a Pledge of Allegiance. Since we're doing this on Zoom, we'll just go ahead and skip that. And we'll move on to the roll call. It's currently 2:00. The regular meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission will come to order. And Joe or David, would you guys be willing to call the roll?
Just to let you guys know, I have not seen David Gertz come onto the meeting yet. We're about to reach out to him and see where he's at.
Okay, well, let's pause this until David's on here. So hold on, everybody.
So who are we hearing there? Was that?
That was our Bern. That was our IT guy, Adam.
Oh, okay.
And so it looks like at this point here, the planning department down there is not online yet. So we'll just hold on here for 1 sec.
Hey, Sean, Dave's working on getting connected to the Zoom meeting. I just want to make sure, were you guys aware that we are now streaming these on YouTube?
Yes, we had heard that, or I at least heard that.
We should watch what we say.
Well, just want to make sure you're aware, if anybody's doing both, that there is about a 20-second delay in what you see in YouTube. So don't be alarmed. Okay, it looks like Dave is coming on.
And then these are recorded as well. Is that right, Adam?
Yes, they are.
Thank you.
Dave, are you in?
Yeah, that's been the case even when we met in person, that all of the meetings were recorded there as well.
At least
audio. That's the interesting thing here is that the, so am I right? When you say recorded, is it including all of us in the visual? Just out of curiosity, is that part of the deal?
Yes, we do. But what you see on the website is just the audio because we have a limitation on how much space we have on the website. So we only put the audio out there, but we do have it in audio video.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, Dave, now that you're on, I'm going to go ahead and restart the recording and let you guys do your thing.
Sounds good.
Okay, thank you. We'll go ahead and call the regular meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission. It is currently 2:05 and we'll go ahead and skip item number 1, which is the Pledge of Allegiance. And number 2, Joe or David, would you like to call roll here for us?
Yeah, sure. Mr. Hinckley,
Here.
Mr. Kennedy,
Here.
Ms. Hanning,
Here,
Mr. Spiegelberg,
Here.
Chairman Moore.
And here. And David, I don't think you were on before, but Mr. Spiegelberg is here with me at my residence, just so everybody's aware of that.
Okay. Yeah, sorry for being late. I was having issues getting on Zoom. It's a new computer thing I'm using, so.
Not a worry at all. Thank you so much and appreciate everything. We'll move on. We don't have any absent members of this meeting, so we'll skip item number 3. Item number 4 is approval of the agenda. Are there any additions or deletions to the agenda for the February 10th, 2021 meeting?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Kennedy.
I move to approve the agenda with the addition of election of chairman and vice chairman following disclosures, and also move current planning projects immediately following the election.
Okay, so again, yes, we're going to have to do votes for the chair and vice chair for the meeting. And so that's not on our current agenda. So we'll add that right after disclosures. And then you want to move current planning projects as the second item on the agenda before we get to public applications. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you.
Is that something that's a motion second discuss, or do we just do these at the discretion of the chair? What's the procedure here?
Well, what I'm going to do, Mr. Hinckley, is I was going to ask you and Ms. Hanning, I'm going to ask you the same thing as well as Mr. Spiegelberg. Does anybody see an issue with that, or do you have any comments? Mr. Hinckley.
Okay, thank you. I'll try to do this orderly. Yeah, I just had a suggestion myself for an addition, so if you want to just throw those all together. And that was simply to note that the minutes from the last meeting said we were going to bring forward a discussion of meeting dates and times. So I would ask that we expand that other items and announcements to be more than simply an announcement of the next meeting, but rather let's make that the home for the larger discussion of P&Z operations that we started last month, but I think you correctly, Mr. Chair, said, well, let's wait till we got a few more folks on deck. So if we could continue that discussion under that item, whatever number it is now.
Yeah, well, so what we'll do is, Mr. Hinckley, excuse me for interrupting. Let's just add to the agenda where it says other items, announcements, next meeting, March 10th. Let's just have discussion on that. So add that to the agenda, and like you'd said, it's more than just an announcement. We're just gonna have a discussion on that. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, that's the idea. I just wanted a home for that somewhat larger discussion about priorities and one thing or another. Thank you.
Good, Mr. Hinckley, thank you. Ms. Hanning, as far as what Mr. Commissioner Kennedy had proposed in the agenda, do you see any issue with that or anything you might like to add?
no, I would second that, the combined motions of both Member Hinckley and Member Kennedy. They sound good to me.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Hanning. Mr. Spiegelberg?
No comment.
No issue, okay. So we will revise the agenda, just so everybody's clear here. After disclosures, we're going to do elections. Second thing, we're going to work on the current planning project, which is the APOZ regulations. And then we'll get into public applications, Walter subdivision and the Two River subdivision. And then the last item before citizen comments would be just visiting about the next meeting, March 10th, 2021, and just have a discussion on that. Does that sound appropriate to everybody? Okay, very good. We'll go with that. Mr. Kennedy, and you made that in a motion, and Ms. Hanning, you seconded, correct? Okay, and so we'll go ahead and take a vote. Mr. Hinckley?
Aye.
Ms. Hanning?
Aye.
Mr. Kennedy?
Aye.
Mr. Spiegelberg?
Aye.
And Commissioner Moore, myself, aye, motion carries. So the agenda has been changed. We'll move on to item number 5 is approval of the minutes. Are there any corrections to the minutes for the January 13th, 2021 meeting?
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the minutes as presented.
Okay, so we got a motion. Mr. Hinckley, have you had an opportunity to review the minutes from last month's meeting?
Yeah, and I guess rather than a formal correction, if I could just comment on those, would that be appropriate?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, and it's kind of continues something we started. If you look at the minutes over the last, say, 2 years, they're quite inconsistent in terms of how far they go. So I would just like to lobby our esteemed minute taker there, a little more expansion. I think ideally the minutes, they don't need to be a blow by blow, obviously, and we've got the recording, but I think they serve a valuable purpose as kind of a table of contents, and certainly for those that are going back and trying to figure out what happened when. So rather than just a motion was made and passed, if I could lobby for just a little more expansion of these are the things that were discussed. For example, at our last meeting, under that meeting times and dates, we actually had a very brief discussion of things like, should we be setting priorities for ourselves, and should we be proactive or reactive? And again, I don't think we need to explain all of that, but if I could just put in a gentle nudge towards the minutes being expanded somewhat to let somebody who's going back and looking at them have some idea of what was discussed by topic. And then if they want to find out, they can dig in a little deeper. So thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chair. If I could just lobby for just a little more in the minutes of what actually happened so people would know what's going on and where to look. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hinckley. Mr. Gertsch, will that be an issue for you and Joe to take a little bit better notes for our minutes?
Yeah, I mean, the problem is what has happened in the past is we get more specific, and then we get criticized for doing everything just that our minutes are not accurate. And so we are trying to keep it a little bit more summarized so that if people really want to know what is said, they can listen to the recording. But that doesn't mean we don't agree with any expansion. I mean, we can definitely expand it a little bit and just summarize the topics a little bit better. So
Okay.
Ultimately, what I think Bern is asking, we don't have a problem with that. So
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Gertsch. Ms. Hanning, have you had an opportunity to review the minutes? Well, you were at the last meeting, but appreciate you probably got it back. It probably weren't on there, but I guess what I'm asking for, and you, Mr. Spiegelberg, do I have a second to Mr. Kennedy's motion?
Mr. Chair, I have reviewed the minutes, but I don't know if there's any procedural rule about me having to abstain because although I read the minutes, I didn't listen to the recording. I don't know if that's a requirement for voting. But additionally, Mr. Chair, I just have a quick question about the meeting minutes. Is it atypical or typical to include who seconds a motion in the meeting minutes? Because I see that there isn't a mention of who seconds things, and I just wondered about that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Hanning. Mr. Gertsch, as far as the minutes are concerned, I mean, we marked down on our scripts who first and second some, so I don't think that.
Yeah, we typically do that. So yeah, we'll do a little bit better at that. So.
Well, very good. Well, sounds good. And I think that now, Ms. Hanning, that you are on this board, and sure you were not at last month's meeting. I think it, in my opinion, I think it's appropriate for you to vote on the approval of the minutes, because all we're doing is approving what happened last month. So we have a first from Mr. Kennedy. Do we have a second for approval of the minutes?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Hinckley. So we have a first from Mr. Kennedy and a second from Mr. Hinckley. I'll go ahead and take the roll call here. Mr. Hinckley?
Aye.
Ms. Hanning?
Aye.
Mr. Kennedy?
Aye.
Mr. Spiegelberg?
Aye.
And myself, Chairman Moore? Aye. So the minutes for the January 13th, 2021 regular meeting are approved. Move on to item number 6, which is disclosures. The chair calls for any disclosures to be known.
None?
None from Ms. Hanning. Mr. Kennedy, none? And Mr. Spiegelberg?
None.
And none?
I guess nobody could hear my head shake, so.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. No disclosures to be made here. Okay, so we're going to move on to the elections for chair and vice chair. And so what I'm looking for from each member is we're going to start with the chair, and we'll go around and nominate whoever you'd like to be the chair for our meetings. And I'll start with you, Mr. Hinckley.
I would nominate our current chair if he's willing to accept the nomination.
Well, thank you, Mr. Hinckley. Appreciate that. So you nominate myself. Ms. Hanning, who would you recommend for chair?
Mr. Chair, I also would support you starting your third term, and I asked Mr. Gertsch the other day whether that was possible, because I think you're a steady hand on the commission.
Well, thank you, Ms. Hanning. I appreciate that and look forward to working with you and also Byrne being on the commission now with us, and which will, I think, will be good. So it'll be fun. Mr. Kennedy.
Mr. Chairman, I would move that nomination cease and that we cast a unanimous ballot for Sean Moore for chairman for the next year.
All right. What do we need to do there? Do we need to make a motion for that, Mr. Gertsch?
I just did, actually.
Okay, that was a motion. Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
A second from Mr. Spiegelberg. And I'll try to go through this as fast as I possibly can. Mr. Hinckley?
Aye.
Ms. Hanning?
Aye.
Mr. Spiegelberg?
Aye.
Mr. Kennedy?
Aye.
Okay, thank you guys very much. I appreciate your confidence in me. I really appreciate it. And if there's anything that I can do to help out and make things better, please let me know. We'll go on to vice chair. Do we have a nomination for a vice chair? Mr. Hinckley?
I don't. I guess perhaps maybe you could go down kind of in seniority order. Those who have been there the longest probably have the most useful insight on that. So I guess I'll pass.
Okay, well, Ms. Hanning?
I guess I would nominate Commissioner Kennedy if he's willing to step into the role.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Hanning. Mr. Kennedy?
That's absolutely fine with me. And I know your attendance record, Mr. Chairman, and I'm pretty confident I won't have to do anything.
Well, that's the benefit of being self-employed. I can pretty much level out my schedule and I work here in town. So, Mr. Spiegelberg, do you have a nomination for Vice Chair?
I would agree with Mr. Hinckley and the other lady to
Ms.
nominate
Hanning, yes?
Mr. Kennedy for
Okay.
vice chair.
Okay, so, I too, I'd also agree, Mr. Kennedy, you do a fine job. I actually ask a lot of you, just because of your knowledge in meetings and appreciate your insights. So with that being said, do we have a motion to make Mr. Kennedy the vice chair?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Hanning. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Hinckley. And we'll go through a vote here. Mr. Hinckley,
Aye.
Ms. Hanning,
Aye.
Mr. Spiegelberg,
Aye.
Mr. Kennedy.
I suppose you didn't make yourself vote last time.
And Commissioner Moore, myself, aye. So I will be the chair for the Albany County Planning and Zoning Commission for the year of 2021. And Commissioner Kennedy will be the vice chair for the Albany County Planning and Zoning Commission for the year 2021, the vice chair for 2021. So thank you.
Question?
Yes, sir. Mr. Hinckley, go right.
Yeah, I just wondered, you indicated the terms are annual. Is that correct? I just was curious.
Yes, Mr. Hinckley, that is correct. And so next year at this time, you guys will also be electing a new chair and vice chair at that time. So it's something that you do every single year. All right, very good. Well, let's get, after having that all get done, let's move forward. We're going to move forward with current planning projects, which is APOZ regulations. And I'll try to give kind of a rough idea to the two new commissioners. So probably about a year and a half, we were asked by the Board of County Commissioners at that time to review our current APOZ regulations in the county. And we did work through that. You probably received in your packet what stage and what point we were at with working with those APOZ regulations. And then later last year, we were also asked to look at wind regulations. And so at that point, having to go through the wind regulations, we decided to kind of just put a hold on the APOZ regulations just because we were going through so much at that time. And so we've been asked by the Board of County Commissioners to send them something. And currently we do have regulations on the APOZ. What we're doing is we're reviewing it and looking to see what changes can be made, if we can make it better, if we can, just look at them and send it to them. So it sounds like they want us to send it to them. And so that's just kind of a backstory. Mr. Gertsch, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. So first, the Board of County Commissioners, they did request that you review these and get them, pass these on to them, as soon as we're ready to do that. They're anxious to look at them and get these things through there. The other thing is I'll just go through and kind of give you a very brief summary of what has been done for Mr. Hinckley and Ms. Hanning's edification. So I'll just go through this briefly. It'll just take me a second of summary. So if you look at page 2, we added a definition of best available control technology, which is cited in, you'll see that terminology in the non-conforming area, non-conforming use portion of the regulations. Now on page 3, there's a clarification of the delineation of the Aquifer Protection Overlay Zone, what that means. So some language about the 75 feet of Satanka formation was removed. The reason that was removed is because of, the way that it was stated, and this could have been rewritten, but we just removed it, is that anywhere there's less than 75 feet of Satanka is aquifer protection overlay zone, which is not necessarily accurate. That's not how it was delineated. The western boundary was delineated based on 75 feet of Satanka. The northern and southern boundaries were not. And then the eastern boundary along the, the mountain ridge up there was not delineated that way. Page 4 corrects a reference. There's a reference correction, and then it deletes a process for request for inclusion into the APOZ. So this was removed because it was the process itself was pretty problematic. Just the way that was written. I think there was multiple different interpretations of that section and what it can read. And so I think we just planning and zoning opted to just remove that. So that's what we did there. And then pages 10 through 15. Now this is where some of when the tumbleweed and things were going on with that was happening. One of the things that was pointed out is we did not have an aquifer protection overlay zone development permit. So there's not a separate permit from our other permitting, and which is actually is what the city does with theirs is they'll require certain, like a site-specific investigation with a subdivision permit or a site-specific investigation with the zoning permit or something like that. But and that's how we were doing it. However, it was brought up that maybe it would be better to have an aquifer protection overlay development permit that applies to certain things. So this permit is included in there. The process is included, the criteria, and then there's exemptions from the permitting requirements. And part of that process includes the site-specific investigation. So then you get to page 15. That removes, and this is some things that planning and zoning did, was removed system repairs and tank removal from needing a professional engineer to design those, or to look at the property and do designs on those types of repairs or removal of a tank. So that was removed, I believe, by Mr. Spiegelberg brought that up. And then pages 16 through 19, there are overhauls to the non-conforming use standards. That was another area that came up in our review of the tumbleweed situation, that the county attorney especially felt that was not working so well. So those are the areas that you'll see in the current draft, or the draft that we're looking at today. So that's what those things are addressed, or what have addressed. So just to bring you up to speed on that. So and if there's any questions on any of those things, or anything about the Board of County Commissioners meeting the other day, I mean, I'd be happy to answer that question. But so that's all I have.
Thank you, David. And so what I'll do here is pretty much, this is just going to be open discussion with members of the Planning and Zoning Commission right now on where we want to go, what we want to do. We have this draft that we worked on. And Mr. Gertz, can you help me out? What's the time frame that the Board of County Commissioners want to see something from us?
I think immediately. From what I understand is they want it as soon as possible.
So thank you, Mr. Gertz. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and go around with discussion on everybody's thoughts on, we know the Board of County Commissioners want us to send them something, but just tell us our thoughts, and we'll just have a lively discussion here and figure out where we're going to go from here with the APOZ regulations. Mr. Hinckley?
Yeah, I guess I'd start, and I have a specific motion when we get to that point, but I'd like to start with maybe a question for Jennifer, as I'm sensitive to the process, and we want to make sure that we hit all the bases. This is going to be an important regulation, and I think everyone would agree, let's do it right. What I see when I read them, and as you and I have discussed, David, you read different things in different places. It suggests that the way to advance regulations through the process is for the Planning and Zoning Commission to certify them to the county commissioners. in the rules and regulations for Planning and Zoning Commission, one sees apparently sees a requirement for a 30-day comment period in public hearing preceding that certification to the Board of County Commissioners. If that's the case, then I think my thought of how to accommodate the county commissioners would be for us to post the current version that's come out of P&Z's efforts, post it for a 30-day public review, hearing at the end of that, and then certify it forward with the understanding that we're not going to go wallow around in it for another year and a half. But I think we could provide a service to the county commission by having a public hearing under our umbrella, as seems to be contemplated in the regulations, and then turn that whole works over, recommendations from planning and zoning, as well as all the public comment and everything else that had been accumulated, turn that all over to the county commission. Because I'm thinking they're going to want to have a public input opportunity anyway. So perhaps we could kill both two birds with one stone by holding our own hearing. And I'm trying to be respectful of that 30 days. So maybe if it weren't for that, we could certify them today. So I guess we need a legal opinion on that. I just want to make sure that we do this right so it doesn't have to get done again.
Byrne, this is Jennifer. So I agree with you. My reading is that you have to have the 30-day comment here, and then it contemplates the 14-day comment at the commissioners meeting. However, because these are rules and regulations, my understanding from Peg, and David can clarify as well, is that what I need to clarify. So let me back up. I need to clarify with Peg whether we have to follow that 30-day hearing window within Planning and Zoning Commission before we move it forward to the commissioners. After that, because this is rules and regulations, it falls under administrative procedures, and it has to go out for 45-day public comment from the commissioners. So I will clarify and get an answer to all of you before the end of the week as to whether or not this, whatever Planning and Zoning Commission is going to put out, can be certified immediately to go to commissioners for their 45-day public comment window, or if we need to, within Planning and Zoning, do a 30-day notice, have a public hearing then, and then certify it. I will add to that, the agenda for the commissioners meeting on the 16th has been finalized as of today. So the soonest that we could get this on the agenda for the commissioners would be March 2nd. So that gives us a little bit of time in our planning.
And a little follow-up, just because of the calendar, we could not give 30 days notice for the March meeting. So
correct. If we have to, yep, you're right. So if Planning and Zoning has to do that, we couldn't get it to them on the March meeting. If we don't, and it just goes to them for their 45 days, we could get it there for March.
Okay. And one other question then of Jennifer, and then maybe we can go back and I'll shut up for a minute. Then would a contingent motion be appropriate when we get to that point, Jennifer, depending on your findings?
Would be appropriate. You could say to certify it immediately, if possible, pending legal review. Otherwise, any alternative to set it for the 30-day.
Okay.
Mr. Chair? Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Gertsch.
Okay. So the way that the planning office has interpreted since I've been here is that statute about the 30 days applies to comprehensive planning and plans. We've always used the paragraph after that, which basically says that, we can certify recommendations to effectuate the plan afterwards. And it only requires the 14 days before the Board of County Commissioners, but obviously we use the Administrative Procedures Act. So that is how we've always interpreted that. But obviously, whatever the county attorney's office decides on the decision, we'll follow that. But going, I mean, that's how we've always proceeded. I'm just laying that out. That's what we've always done. So
No, thank
no
you.
other county attorney has, corrected that since
Yeah.
then.
Well, yeah.
And, yeah.
Oh,
But it's confusing. I mean, you can read it either way, I think, sometimes, some of these things, so.
Well, thank you, Mr. Gertz. You've always done a tremendous job. You've been the planner since I've been on the commission, so I'm going to continue. Mr. Hinckley, thank you for your comments. I'm going to move on to Ms. Hanning, but before I do that, or no, Ms. Hanning, just go ahead because I'll add it here at the end. But you go ahead and tell us what your thoughts are and what you'd like to see, and if you've had an opportunity to read through these and your thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with the idea that once we sort out the legal process, that considering it's already been 1.5 years of the commission's time, it probably would be worthwhile to kick it up to the Board of Commissioners as soon as possible for their consideration. So I would support that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Hanning. Mr. Kennedy?
I would agree with both of the other members that have spoken before me. And I'd also add, just so they're aware of it, it's not uncommon for the commissioners to kick something back to us either and tell us, here are the places we'd like you to make more effort on. And so I too would like to forward this on to them as soon as possible. And we've spent many meetings up until the wind regulations came up, going through these. And I know we've made at least 3 revisions from the first draft that we made at least 1.5 years ago. So I too would like to just send these on as appropriate with legal counsel.
All right, thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Spiegelberg, any comments on the APOZ regulations?
I do. I pretty much agree with everyone's comments, but I think the county commissioners has kind of sent us kind of a mixed signal. I read in the paper where the county commissioners and the city of Laramie were trying to kind of join forces and make the examination of the Casper Aquifer a priority. That to me is sending mixed signals when the county commissioners kick back to us, say we want something immediately. Well, I've thought this thing through pretty much, and I always do think things through. And I have a few comments, and then you can take them for what they're worth. But I have concerns. I do not want to see an overreach of the city of Laramie into the county as the boundaries are defined now. There is an effort, I know, and I've heard it from many people the last several months, the last several years, that they want to get these boundaries moved around. And it's an arbitrary move to move these boundaries around, and it further hinders the development out in the county. That really concerns me. Anyway, I'm going to give you these comments here. Having recently read an article in the local paper, I was pleased to learn that the Albany County and City of Laramie officials are joining to prioritize a joint effort to examine the Casper Aquifer matter. The aquifer in question east of Laramie supplies approximately 50% of the water needs for the City of Laramie and surrounding county residences. Hopefully, this joint effort will focus on the most imminent threat hazards posed by petroleum and chemical semi-trailers tankers operating 24/7 in the I-80 stretch east of Laramie between the summit and downward west to the I-80 highway portion, commonly known as Telephone Canyon. This stretch starts at the summit and progresses downward west to the mouth of the canyon, where bedrock and arroyos are abundant in breaching the exposed bedrock stratas in close proximities to the underlying aquifer. The worst potential hazard would be a scenario of gasolines, diesels, chemicals spilled by rupturing tankers to funnel directly into the aquifer strata in multiples of thousands of gallons. This funneling of contaminants could occur anywhere from the summit to the mouth of the canyon, a horrifying scenario to say the least. We're sticking together here.
You're fine.
Oh, okay.
Take your time.
Okay. No one can dispute that this is a real and predictable ticking time bomb for this precious water supply vital to county and city residents. About 1.5 years ago, every county and zoning commission member signed a letter to the Wyoming governor punctuating the urgency for to solve this contamination looming most likely a high probability. A copy of the letter has been provided for all members of the County and Zoning Commission meeting for today's meeting. To date, only a few minor but still important safeguards have been implemented. One, the Highway Department has reduced the speed limit in Telephone Canyon. Two, surfacing of highway toppings for better traction have been installed. These are small improvements, but nevertheless important. Three, caches for containment of spills at various locations in the canyon in both east and westbound lanes are planned for the next improvement. The Wyoming Highway Department has been most helpful recently in implementing these improvements. Now, these improvements are the minor improvements. That letter that I gave you a copy of has what's recommended to really fine tune and substantially reduce the probability of contamination. Those improvements that are the most important are very, very costly. And that is something that's been probably something that's been impeding getting a lot of that done is the cost. But nevertheless, I think that the focus of this Telephone Canyon thing is imminent. And it's up to somebody to get this thing funded. The state legislature can look at legalizing marijuana and things like that. But we've got a ticking time bomb up here before there's an imminent catastrophe and we lose half of Laramie's water. However, more expensive and complex steps are needed to reduce the probability of a disaster resulting from petroleum, chemical, or other deadly pollutants threatening our water supply. And the thing is sticking together. Thank you, Sean.
You're welcome.
Okay. Again, the county city task force needs to place 100% focus on the Telephone Canyon hazard, including efforts, energies, funding, and above all, community involvement. Funding is the greatest challenge. Regarding other areas adjacent to the I-80 Telephone Canyon risk, Dr. Robert Starkey performed a study using scientific and empirical data gathered extensively north and south of the sloping Laramie Range relative to the portions of the same aquifer that it could affect the Casper Aquifer. Data collected was scientifically, data collected was significantly far beyond the Laramie area being considered for risk. In summary, Dr. Starkey concluded no contamination, none, was evident for the vast study area. In other words, no contamination caused by septic systems or wells, none. Also, county properties outside City of Laramie boundaries are scrutinized constantly by the Department of Environmental Quality and the Environmental Protection Agency of the state at the state level. To date, no significant contaminations or reports have surfaced. Recently, I obtained the 2019 City of Laramie Water Quality Report, which constantly monitors Laramie's and publishes an annual report. Absolutely no excesses over allowed contaminants, none. Excellent report which verifies safe drinking water. Recently, I was pleased to learn that a flyover scan using electromagnetic imaging to examine subsurface strata and contamination potential was performed in and around the Casper Aquifer serving Laramie. It was reported that some of the areas more suspect for contamination were actually found to be safer geologically than originally anticipated. Again, apparently more good science and diminished contamination risks. Over the last several years plus, various individuals have expressed concern over various APOZ issues that have generally failed to convince the community, especially those living and doing business in the county. More recently, there has been an arbitrary attempt to move boundaries of the APOZ, thus further hindering legitimate land development in the county. In conclusion, an up-to-date letter should be sent to the governor and the county city task force, bringing this matter to their utmost attention. The letter should have the signatures of all P&Z members wishing to protect Laramie's water communities.
All right, thank you, John. Your number one concern is your main concern is Telephone Canyon.
My number one concern is Telephone Canyon. There are other areas of concern, but as you recall, Dr. Starkey came on there. He gave a very thorough presentation to the commissioners and our commission, found absolutely zero contamination from wells or septics. And then you've got the city who, I have picked up that water report for years. Sure. And we do not, the city monitors the city's water supply very carefully. There have been absolutely no violations of exceeding the allowable maximums.
And thank you for your comment. And so that's noted, because we have sent a letter to the governor, but we can do that all again and the departments. But let me ask you one thing besides that. As far as the regulations that we have here in front of us that we worked on the last year, how are your feelings towards moving that to the Board of County
I would have no problem with that. And I think we labored that very, very intensely.
Okay.
And Mr. Gersh was very helpful in fine tuning all that.
Okay.
But I really think, what sense does it make to rush everything through? I haven't heard one comment from a county commissioner or a city council member regarding the Telephone Canyon thing. That the probability of that happening is very high. And if it happens, we lose half our water.
Sure.
That is my major concern.
So I tell you what I'll do, maybe and I'll visit with the other P&Z members here, maybe for next month's meeting or something, we'll even have a discussion just solely on the telephone canyon. But at this point here, what we're going to need to do is and what I was going to say earlier is you know, we've been kind of instructed by the Board of County Commission to send them something. And so I do like the idea of putting it out there for 30 days for public comment with us so that we can review comments. But I also want it to be known that to the Board of County Commissioners that we have this, we're happy to send it on to you. We're not trying to hold it up. We actually sent it to the previous board last year, and it got sent back down to us. So I guess procedurally, however anybody wants, however any other commission member would like to move on this or act on this, feel free at this point. Mr. Hinckley. Mr. Hinckley, go ahead.
If somebody else was ahead of me, fine. But
Go ahead.
the first comment I had is, okay, I'm sorry, who's talking?
Mr. Hinckley, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, just first a quick comment. I appreciate the fact that Commissioner Spiegelberg went to the trouble to prepare a written statement. I would like to have that in the record someplace. I know when I take the trouble to write it all down, it doesn't necessarily get transcribed well. So I don't know what the procedure there would be. Maybe you include it in the minutes or something, but I would like to respect Mr. Spiegelberg's work to have written a statement to have that available to us. Then back to the point at hand. Yes, the city and the county are pledging to work together. That's headed towards, is my understanding, a new version of the Aquifer Protection Plan and so forth. But the county regulations are strictly a county item. The city has no more role to play in that than any other publicly interested entity, and so they're certainly welcome to comment. So, yeah, I guess I don't see any reason to hold back pending the results of what that work group comes up with. And then, like I said, I have a motion that I've been kind of scribbling here. If when you're ready for that, Chairman.
Go ahead, Mr. Hinckley.
Okay, it seems to me it captures what we just said, and I'm picking up on what Keith suggested. That okay, I'll move that we either one certify the latest planning and zoning version of the APOZ regs immediately to the county commission for their consideration and action, or if it is determined by legal counsel that a 30-day review period is necessary, that we post to the latest P&Z version of the APOZ regulations for 30-day public comment, at the end of which we certify that version and forward it along with all comments received to the county commission.
Okay, very good. Do we have a second?
Mr. Chairman, Keith Kennedy, second, and a comment, a little follow up on John, since we've got a motion and can discuss a little. I also think that it would be worthwhile for us to make certain that the Transportation Commission has this as well, so that there's a sense of urgency there as they evaluate projects. It's easy for us to forget that they are an independent commission and one of the few that has less oversight from the legislature and the governor than others. And it might very well be possible that there's several, as of late, I've been forced to work more with DEQ and Clean Water Act, and I think there may be some sources where they could get some funding to actually expedite some of those things that John discussed. So with that, I'd welcome the question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy.
Could I,
Yeah, Mr. Spiegelberg, do you want to add something?
well, I don't want to add, I want to ask Mr. Hinckley a question. He's a hydrologist and so forth. Do you agree with me that the I-80 canyon hazard is the biggest threat to our water?
Well, before we do that, Mr. Spiegelberg, and excuse me for interrupting you. Right now, we've got a motion. We've got a motion, and we do have a second. And so what we should be focusing on here right now is discussion about the motion that was made. And Mr. Kennedy seconded that. Ms. Hanning, do you have any comments with the motion that's on the table at this moment?
I'm in support of the motion, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, and then Mr. Spiegelberg, we will get to that discussion. But as far as the motion that's on the table right now, are we fine with the motion,
Yes,
Mr.
I'm
Hinckley?
fine.
Okay, very good. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Jennifer Curran has her hand up. I was just going to note that. So.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Kern.
Thank you, Chairman Moore. I just wanted to give some information that I have about the county commissioners and the joint work groups with the city of Laramie for everyone's knowledge. That there's a resolution that's going to be on the commissioner's agenda next week on the 16th that authorizes the creation of those from the county side and lays out the goals that they have, which include education of the members on both sides, from both the city and the county, at some point taking public comment and utilizing staff from the county as needed as they work through, as each work group works through each of their things. So I think it's not inappropriate for this Planning and Zoning Commission to move forward the regulations. If anything, it gives the commissioners and the city of Laramie, as they're looking at the existing regulations, the most current version of the existing regulations. So that shouldn't be a hindrance and would likely be helpful to them.
Thank you, Ms. Curran. I appreciate that. So we have a motion, and with what Ms. Curran had said, I'll go ahead and call for a vote on Mr. Hinckley's motion here. Mr. Hinckley?
Aye.
Ms. Hanning?
Aye.
Mr. Kennedy?
Aye.
Mr. Spiegelberg?
Aye.
And Chairman Moore and myself, aye. So motion carries. Mr. Gertz, that's what we'll do with the APOZ regulations at this point.
Privilege of the floor for just a moment.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Kennedy.
Sean, I had an emergency meeting come up that ended up scheduled for 3 o'clock, and I'm going to excuse myself with the excusement of the rest of the commission, and I will return at 4 o'clock. If you're still here at that time, I will log back on, and with that, I will see you all later, and thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Appreciate it. You are excused. Okay, so back to our agenda for the meeting, that with our current planning projects and what we're doing with the APOZ regulations and that motion, we're going to move on to public applications. And the first application that we have here is public application A, which is the Walters Subdivision Final Plat SD-07-20. Mr. Gertz?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. This is you've seen the preliminary plat, at least some of the members have. This is a proposal to split a lot into two. It's currently within the Fox Park Estate subdivision. The applicant is requesting just to split this lot. It's located at 7 Lodgepole Drive in Fox Park. They're requesting approval of a final plat and a subdivision permit. Access to both the properties exists from Lodgepole Drive. Currently on the property, there already is 2 homes on the property, and so what will essentially happen is they'll split this lot, and each home will be on a different lot. They use a shared well and then individual septic systems for each of those properties. So a number of folks reviewed this. Albany County Fire District number 1 had no comments. Bill Gorman, the county engineer, reviewed the application and provided comments which were addressed by the applicant. There were no adverse they received a no adverse recommendation from Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality. Game and Fish reviewed this and had no concerns. The Conservation District didn't have any concerns. This property is in Priority Growth Area 4. As I mentioned, there a well exists that serves both properties, and then septic systems are individual and already sited on the property. One of the things that DEQ notes is that we have no permits for them. DEQ doesn't and the county doesn't, and that's they've been up there for a while, and that's pretty typical. Our records get a little shady after before the 90s. Storm drainage wise, there was a drainage report completed and the county engineer reviewed it. Utilities, the Postal Service, there's already utilities on the property. Postal Service is already established, or they've already established mail delivery with the Postal Service. No new roads are being asked or being contemplated. They'll both be accessed from Lodgepole Drive. And Lodgepole Drive and the roads within the Fox Park subdivision are already governed by covenants and an association up there. Financial, there's no financial assurance that's required. Because this is a 3 lots or less, the fire warden can waive the fire safety requirements. And notice was provided in accordance with our regulations. Findings of fact for this application, the summary of subdivision requirements listed in the staff report shall be incorporated as findings of fact. The final plat complies with the standards of the Albany County Platting and Subdivision regulations. Fire requirements may be waived by the fire warden. The property is already developed and has a dwelling on each of the proposed lots. Conclusions of law, the applicant is proceeding in accordance with requirements of the Albany County Platting and Subdivision regulations. Just a brief analysis, as I noted, this is within the Fox Park subdivision. The density and lot sizes that result from this subdivision are consistent with the surrounding properties. This lot, I think, is actually the biggest lot that currently exists in the subdivision. And so it'll end up being a 3-acre lot and a 2-acre lot, which is still larger than most of the lots there. Dwellings exist. The division will not create really any additional impacts because everything already exists. I mean, there's nothing that's, this is basically administrative and you're putting a line in between the properties. So, so staff recommends that you approve the final plat and recommend approval of the final plat and subdivision permit for the Walter subdivision SD-07-20 based upon and incorporating the findings of fact and conclusions of laws as stated in the staff report. Is there any questions for myself? I can take questions. The applicant's agent, or whatever you want to call him, engineer is on the line. Jared Ralph is the engineer on this project, and he'd be happy to answer his questions as well.
Thank you, Mr. Gertsch. I appreciate the info. And we did see this come through as a preliminary plat, but I think Mr. Hinckley and Ms. Henning, you weren't on the commission at the time when it came through as a preliminary plat. Mr. Hinckley, do you have any questions for Mr. Gertsch?
Yeah, thank you, and appreciate your patience with those of us who haven't got the history with this, but I thought maybe it would give us a little platform for a lesson in planning. David, when I looked at the zoning maps, they didn't agree with what you attached to the packet in terms of this piece being zoned small lot residential versus rural residential. What's the story there?
Okay, so the zoning maps, the ones that were attached to the packet should be correct. It shows the yellow, which is small lot residential, but if you're looking at the ones that are online, they haven't been updated. This, as part of this project, it's, a few months ago when we did the preliminary, they also did a zoning change before then to change the zoning to small lot residential. So I apologize to not have communicated that. So everybody else on the board kind of was part of that process, but obviously it wasn't included here. So
those posted maps get updated once a year or something? I mean, what's this?
Something like that, yeah. So, yeah, we tried to do it, once a year, more often if possible. Our hope is at some point we'll have an online map that gets updated, a little bit more often. But at this point, where there's static PDF maps, we just don't update them as often. So.
Question: why did DEQ get involved at all for a lot split? I was surprised to see that they did a DEQ Chapter 23. Was that required, or?
Yeah. So because our regulations to be reviewed as a small subdivision, one, it has to be under three lots or less. And then there's some other stipulations. One of the stipulations is it can't be within a platted subdivision. Fox Park is a platted subdivision, and so that basically says that you can't review this as a small subdivision because it's in a platted subdivision. And part of the regular subdivision process is the DEQ permit. So, yeah, that's why. So,
if they were coming from scratch, that wouldn't have happened. Is that correct? Then it would have been a small lot subdivision.
Correct, yeah. If they weren't next to or weren't in an existing subdivision, they wouldn't have had to do this. So.
What makes a subdivision different than a lot split? Again, thank you, colleagues in chair, for your indulgence, but I'm just trying to get clear on how these things work.
It's the same thing. I'm using them interchangeably. Yeah.
Okay.
So just a little history. Back in the 2000s, they actually allowed for you to do a lot split. So any property owner could split their lot one time by statute. But early 2000s, they removed that from the statute and required that all splitting of land go through a subdivision process instead of just and that was kind of more of a lot split. In some jurisdiction, a lot split may be something different too. Like the city, they might have a different, they might use that terminology different than we do. I'm just using it interchangeably, and I should probably just say subdivision, but yeah.
Okay. And then what, were there any comments from the neighbors at all? I guess I assume not, but I didn't see that explicit.
No.
And they're all notified, everybody within X feet or something?
Yeah, anyone that's contiguous to that property is notified. A sign is posted in the area, and then it's also published in the paper. So yeah, the sign right now, there's not a whole lot of people up there right now because it's being winter. And then the fire was happening when they started this process. So I don't know. But anybody that directly was next to it did get notified by certified mail. So.
And is it correct that they couldn't just put two houses on the existing lot? Why are they even before us?
So yeah, when they did that, it was legal to do two houses on the lot. The reason why they want it separate, I believe, and I might have to look through the application material, is they just wanted to have two different ownerships, because you put two houses on a lot, one owner owns all of that. But splitting it, I think it was a family or something that they wanted each member to have a house or something like that.
But I'm remembering a discussion before this group maybe 2 years ago about the issue of allowing a second residence on an existing lot. And
right.
That, I think, ended up being tabled at the county commission. Can you remind us of where that went?
Yeah, so a little bit of history. Before 2015, we allowed a second residence on any lot in the county. That was allowed. In 2015, we adopted our zoning resolution amendments, or the big update we did. And then that deleted that opportunity. So basically it said you can have one dwelling on a lot, except for under certain circumstances. And then from there, because of the rural nature, people buy big properties and they want to have a second house or a family, a mother-in-law house or something on it. There was kind of some pressure to change that, which the planning staff put that all together. The Planning and Zoning Commission, we did approved that and we moved it to the Board of County Commissioners. But there were some issues. I think there was some discussion about how we handled the second residence in the aquifer protection area. And then the board basically tabled it indefinitely and never brought it back. So, I mean, that's something I would like to come back to at some point, is maybe reviewing that and looking at those things and maybe see if there's a way to do some of these things that's more appropriate. You know, I don't know, there's so many lots out there that already have this situation that, you know, now we're limiting everybody else. Like, why did so-and-so get to do it? Why did so-and-so get to do it? And, you know, especially if they have a larger lot, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to, unless you're in a vulnerable area, then it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to like say no to all these things. But right now we are, so.
Okay, no, that's reasonable. Your comment about that they wanted to change the ownership so they didn't get to fighting with each other, but they'll share a well. Is that any part of, I'm not trying to tell me what to do, but is that in our lane at all? Do we care? Is that something that's relevant to our decision that they are offering to share a well?
Not really. I don't think that's within something we care about. What we do care about is they have access to it, which was provided on the plat. They have an easement for that shared well. And so both property owners can access the well, so.
The conclusion, one of the conclusions in their engineering report was that this provides opportunity to grow and provides more needed homes. From what I understand, that's not the case. There's no intention to expand anything. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's no plan to expand anything. You're correct.
And then finally, the DEQ review talks about, it's kind of an oddly written one, as though nobody had ever built anything. Of course, they already have. So it talks about things like, we recommend the no septic systems within 151 feet of the down gradient boundary. Do we know, is that the case or not? Like I say, they were kind of doing their analysis as though it was starting from scratch. I wonder, how does it compare with the reality on the ground? Do we know?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess that would apply only if they needed to replace their septic system, and then that would come into play. So
we would see that implemented if they came in to replace. Then they would have to kind of bring it into conformity with the plat. All right, thank you. Oh, I appreciate it, everybody. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Hinckley. Ms. Hanning, do you have a question for Mr. Gerch? And if we could, and I know there's a lot of questions, but if we could keep it specific towards this application. But go ahead, Ms. Hanning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'm directing these questions to either Mr. Gerch or the applicant's representative. In looking through the application, I didn't see a map where the current septic systems are marked on a map, and I was curious about whether they meet setback from the shared well. That's my first question.
So, Mr. Chair, that was on a preliminary plat. So when we went through that process, the septic systems were shown on that plat. They're just not shown on a map or anything in this packet. So.
Do you recall whether they? Sorry, Mr. Chair, Mr. Gerch, do you recall whether they did meet the setback?
I do not recall, honestly.
I'm somewhat concerned. Just it seems based on the maps that I can see that probably the only place you could fit septic on this lot or proposed two lots is probably up gradient of this shared well. So that causes me some concern, as well as looking at their private well completion record. They say it's unknown whether they have a well seal. So the Weston report that was submitted to DEQ, thank you, by the way, for forwarding that. That provided a lot of useful information. That report talks a lot about how the water well septic system compatibility exists. But I have a hard time seeing that compatibility when it appears as though these tanks and leach fields are up gradient of a shared well, and that the shared well is possibly not completed to the best practices. So that causes me some concern. It's one thing for a family to decide that they're willing to live off of a water well that is may face the risk from up gradient septic systems. But when you subdivide it and turn it into something that can now be sold in a different manner, I guess it causes me some cause for concern to not have a better handle on where the septic is. And I guess just to close on that, is there a way for them to bring in an existing system and get it permitted now and bring it into compliance?
I mean, these systems, I don't know when they were installed, and maybe Mr. Ralph can answer that question. So the standards when they installed them may have been different standards than what we have now. So I mean, all we could do is try to document where they are, but I'm not sure that's going to be. I mean, that would just be helpful to know where they are. I mean, that's all we're going to glean from that process, I guess. I mean, we've never made anybody, you know, especially like in the 80s and those types of things, come back and have them certified or apply for a zoning or a wastewater permit. So it's not something that we've ever practiced. So, but Mr. Ralph might have some more information for you on some of those details, I guess.
Yeah, I'm currently looking at a copy of the preliminary plat where we show the locations of the existing septic systems and relative to the well house, and it also has the contours turned on. So I can see in lot. Let me make sure I'm using the correct annotation here. It's been a couple of iterations. Lot 1B. That would actually run towards the southeastern corner, or that very southern property pin, away from the well house, and it has adequate separation. It's closer to that's the property line that's running north and west along the Forest Service property, along that road there. So it's that one is far enough away. And then I'm looking at the for lot 1A. I believe it meets distance requirements from the eyeball test that I have here on my monitor. Contours would also show it would not flow. It would flow more towards Lodgepole Drive than directly towards the well house. So we're meeting we're meeting distance requirements. It's looking like it's not going to flow into the flow towards the well house. It'll flow more towards Lodgepole Drive. And then your question for future development, the northern that septic system could easily be installed somewhere on the closer to the north side of lot 1A. That's the the more substantial lot, and that would actually flow it towards essentially create the same conditions just on the north side of the existing building. And then just to also maybe take it a step further and address your concerns when it comes to future families or people coming in. I believe right now it's the intent for I think Gail Walters' daughter was going to, oh yes, please, thank you, David. I believe it was his daughter's currently living in that building, and this is just a way for him to make sure that his daughter can have some land for the future, possibly develop her own more permanent house. So you can see, yeah, you can see better there. Lot 1B, yeah, it'll just shed right off, and then there's a substantial difference distance between the well house and the approximate location of the septic tank and leach field for lot 1A.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Ralph, for answering that question that was important for me. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. Then any other questions? All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you. I was having difficult getting back on the screen because when David put the plat map up there, I couldn't figure it out. So I apologize. Thank you, Ms. Hanning, for your questions. Thank you, Mr. Rudd, for your comments. Let's see, Mr. Spiegelberg, do you have any concerns?
No, none.
Okay, none from Mr. Spiegelberg, and none for me. I think everything that's been asked and what I've seen is fine by me. So do we have, so at this point I'm looking for, well, before we move on there, Mr. Hinckley, do you have any questions for Mr. Rudd? Or Mr. Ralph, excuse me, Jared, Mr. Ralph. Do you have any questions?
Yes, maybe one quick one. I noticed on the plat, there's a footnote that was added, and I think County Engineer Gorman flagged it about wastewater disposal systems are to be located at least 151 feet up gradient of neighboring properties. So, an interestingly precise number, 151. What's the origin of that number?
Off the top of my head, I'm a little more familiar with my previous work experience was in Laramie County when it came to septic systems. So that sounds like that's just covering ourselves to make sure that we meet standards for future septic system. When we have to replace the leach field or replace the system, making sure that we are within standards. Is the way I interpreted it.
There's probably more of a story there to get to 151, but okay.
Mr. Hinckley, yeah, I don't know if it's a typo or what, but I'm sure you're familiar with the standards of the septic tank, 100 foot and additional 50 foot from so I'm not sure, but it meets the requirements. So I'm okay with that. But if you have any other questions for Mr. Ralph.
No, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Hinckley. Ms. Hanning, do you have any questions for Mr. Ralph? Okay, so you're shaking your head no. Mr. Spiegelberg, do you have any questions for Mr. Ralph, the engineer?
None.
And representative, okay. So at this time, if the applicant wishes to say something to the commission or would like to answer questions, we're here. Mr. Ralph, I don't know if are you the representative for the applicant?
I am, and I have no questions at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Ralph. And at this point, what we'll do is we'll open up to the public if there's any public comment. But because we got going with elections, there's one thing I didn't
read off, which I will at this point, is the discussion will be conducted today in accordance with the state statutes and the rules for the Planning and Zoning Commission and other applicable laws. I would address any individual who wishes to speak. Please identify yourself and state your physical address. And with that being said, is there anybody of the public at this point that'd like to comment on this application? And if you would, raise your hand on the Zoom screen, and we'll get to you. And so I'll give a couple minutes here. Doesn't really look like we're going to have anybody, but I will give that opportunity. So just bear with me for about a minute or so. Well, looks like nobody's going to comment on this from the public. So at this point here, I'm looking for what the options that we have, Mr. Hinckley and Ms. Hanning, just because Ms. Hanning, this is your first meeting with us. I mean, I'm sure you're very familiar with meetings since you were on the City Planning Commission. But the three motions that we can take is a recommendation for approval, a recommendation of denial, or continue the application till a later date or another meeting. So at this point, being the chair, I'm looking for a motion.
I would so move, Mr. Chairman.
Right. So we've got a motion for
Approval.
motion for approval. So we have a motion for approval from Mr. Spiegelberg.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Hanning. So we have a first and a second for approval. Is there any discussion? Mr. Hinckley?
Aye.
You're good, Ms. Hanning?
Oh, I was voting, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Any discussion, anything else we need to discuss our concerns prior to making a vote? Mr. Hinckley? None?
No discussion. I'll wait my turn to vote.
Okay, very good. So I'll go ahead and take the roll here. So we have a motion for approval and a second for approval. Mr. Hinckley?
Aye.
Ms. Hanning?
Aye.
Mr. Spiegelberg?
Aye.
And myself, Chairman Moore, aye. So motion passes. The subdivisions will be sent on to the Board of County Commissioners for their review. We'll move on to the next public application, which is public application B, the Two Rivers subdivision, SD-12-20. Mr. Gertsch? Or is this Joe? This is going to be Joe, isn't it?
Good. Yeah, hi.
All right, go right ahead.
So our applicant is Felicia PB Stevenson Revocable Trust, applying for approval of preliminary and final plats and subdivision permit. It's located at 34 Two Rivers Road. The current zoning is rural residential, and access will be from Two Rivers Road and already existing road. This application will be reviewed as a small subdivision. The assessors had no concerns. Bill Gorman, the Albany County engineer, had a comment about a potential drainage problem with a portion of the plat and recommended an easement that covers the problem section. Albany County Fire Department has had no comment. Albany County Road and Bridge, Rob Fisher, noted that the second two lots will need approach licenses to access, and Wyoming Game and Fish Department had no concerns. This property is in priority growth area number 3. Water will be provided by individual wells, and there's already water for lot 1 established. Septic will be provided, will provide the wastewater treatment, and septic for lot 1 is already established. A storm drainage report was complete for this proposal and reviewed by Bill Gorman, the county engineer. A drainage easement is required per the regulations. However, he would support a variance that designates a drainage corridor that would prohibit building. Carbon Power and Light has electricity in the area. Telephone, landlines, and cell phone service is also available. Postal service can be provided to all lots. No new roads are being provided. Two Rivers Road is a county maintained public road. Fire protection will be provided by the county. And notice has been provided in accordance with Albany County Planning and Subdivision regulations. The findings of fact. The summary of subdivision requirements listed in this staff report shall be incorporated as findings of fact. This application qualifies to be reviewed as a small subdivision in accordance with the Albany County Planning and Subdivision regulations. The preliminary and final plats comply with the standards of the ACPSR. A variance has been requested for the drainage easement requirement and instead have a drainage corridor that prohibits building. Fire safety requirements may be waived by the fire warden. Conclusions of law. The applicant is proceeding in accordance with the requirements of the Albany County Planning and Subdivision regulations. Staff analysis. This subdivision is being proposed in an area that's been previously developed into a residential community. The lots will be accessed from Two Rivers Road, and the addition of two lots in this area should not create any substantial impacts to the area. The application appears to be to meet the requirements for a subdivision permit as outlined in the Albany County Planning and Subdivision regulations if the variance is granted. With approval of the variance, staff recommends approval of the preliminary and final plats and a subdivision permit for the Two Rivers subdivision preliminary and final plat applications SD 1220 based upon and incorporating the findings of fact and conclusions of law as stated in the staff report.
Thank you, Joe. You did a very nice job. Appreciate that. So at this point, we'll commissioners, what we'll do is we'll go around and we'll ask if we have any questions of Joe here. Mr. Spiegelberg, do you have a question?
I have one quick question. On the plat that I received, I think it was Engineer Gorman that pointed out that there should be a permanent drainage easement. I refer to it as a valley, similar to on a roof, where the drainage converges, and it was recommended that that be part of a some sort of a document giving permanent easement, drainage easement that could not be built upon. Has that been included now in the paperwork?
It's on the final plat. It is on the final plat.
Yeah, John, so if you look at the final plat, they've defined a drainage corridor. That's what they're calling it. And associated with that drainage corridor, they have a note that says no permanent structures or embankments shall be constructed within the drainage corridor. So it's not an easement per se. However, they've created a drainage corridor and they will not allow any building within that corridor.
Oh, here's John again.
I may have been confused, but the first plat that I examined, it looked to me like there was almost like a valley gutter easement that shot right down through the middle there somewhere. And that was my concern. Has that been modified with this these lines now that meander and indicate the drainage where it should lots should not be built upon?
So let me pull up the final plat here if I can find it, and I'll show you what we're talking about. All right, so there's this corridor right here, if you can see, the lines. This is the drainage that Bill Gorman was worried about. So this outlines the drainage, and this is based on engineering of the property. I mean, as you can see, it's pretty wide up here because of the topography or whatever. And then it comes down to here and it hits this. There's a driveway right here, and you can see how the water will back up in this area, and then it'll overtop, and then it continues down to the river. But this whole area is what Bill Gorman was worried about. And through this drainage corridor, he was okay with this. Bill Gorman did approve this this design, and he thinks it'll keep folks protected, and they won't build. They'll build outside that corridor.
Go ahead, John.
So that issue has been addressed to Gorman's satisfaction?
Yes, it has.
Okay, thank you. That's all I was asking.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Hinckley, do you have any questions for Joe or David?
Yeah, thank you. First one was just a procedural question. As I'm reading the findings of fact, it says a variance has been requested. So are we being asked to do two things here? Approve a variance and then approve a temporary or a preliminary and final plat?
So yes, in essence, so you would approve as a finding that that a variance is appropriate in this situation, if you're okay with that, obviously. So you would approve the addition of the finding, maybe change the finding or amend the finding to say that the variance has been reviewed by Bill Gorman. He's okay with it, we're okay with it, and then you can approve it based upon the findings of fact and conclusions of law. If that makes sense. So you basically amend the report. So we're asking you to amend the report to okay the variance, and then with that amendment, you approve the permit or recommend.
So we need a motion to approve the variance if that's what we want to do, and then you will change this to a variance has been granted. Is that the idea?
That would be
just great. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the findings of fact then support the action. Then the second one, it says fire safety requirements may be waived. So that too has a kind of a conditional aspect to it. Do we need to find out if they have been waived, or is that an issue? I just didn't understand the phrasing there.
So the fire warden has the ability to waive that. He's waived them all these small subdivisions, but he hasn't responded specifically to this application. I mean, we could ask him to respond specifically, but he hasn't responded. So it's his prerogative to waive it or not. We put that language in here, and it's kind of up to him if he wants something different to happen, I guess.
But so we don't, I guess I'm just concerned that our findings of fact aren't findings of fact. They're kind of these speculations. Maybe they'll get a variance and maybe the fire marshal will waive it. Are we able to approve it without those speculations being resolved? Again, it's just a procedural question, but I'd like our findings of fact to be facts and line up with our approval.
Right. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. So like I said, he has not approved it. So the language is basically what is in the regulations. The finding is he may be okay with it. So that's a statement of fact. He may do that, but has he? No, we haven't received anything official. So maybe if you are to recommend approval, I could corner him and have him write a statement or write a letter saying he's okay with it. And that way that will go with this application to the board, and then it'll be clean.
So our approval could be contingent upon that. Again, I'm just trying to make all the points line up.
Yeah.
Another just quick question. I assume we know the answer. The neighbors were notified and none of them had any issues with this. Is that correct?
I'm trying to think, has anybody contacted us? No. We don't have any written comments from any of the neighbors. I may have, people passed, there's a sign out there, so people pass the sign. I may have talked to somebody about what's going on. But yeah, I think I did talk to one of the neighbors, but they didn't, they didn't provide any comments or anything to me, or to our office.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hinckley. A good point there. Ms. Hanning, any questions for Joe or David?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I just want to follow on. I'm somewhat confused about the variance process. Is it enough that they made a request in this application by email to get a variance? Will the variance process need to follow its own schedule? Or is it really wrapped into what we're doing now? And I'm only asking because from the city rules that I got used to, the variance would have its own track, and something pertaining to a subdivision would have had its own track. So I'm just trying to understand the procedure. Thank you.
Yeah, so Mr. Chair, to answer that, we do have a separate variance process that has its own permit for zoning variance. However, the subdivision variance, the way that it was written, it's built into the subdivision process. So it's requested along with the application. And it's not a separate process. It's part of the application process.
Thank you very much. My screen froze. I don't know if it's me or you, but I'm hoping you can hear me. And thank you. That answered my question. It's a very efficient process to allow the variance be a part of that. That's great that kind of flexibility is built in.
Ms. Henning, did you hear your screen froze? Were you able to hear everything David said?
I think I heard the vast majority of it. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for checking.
All right, very good. I just want to make sure. Mr. Spiegelberg, I think I already asked you, didn't I? Yeah, I already asked you. And at this point, I don't have any questions. I think very good questions posed by everybody on the commission here. So I don't have any questions for Joe or David. At this point, would the applicant or the applicant's representative like to address the commission?
Am I on the meeting?
We can certainly hear you. Go ahead and identify yourself, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, my name is David Stevenson. I'm the trustee for the Felicia Preeny Batchelor Stevenson Trust. I think everything sounds good to me. A couple of those questions explain some things I was wondering about, and I think it all sounds good.
Well, thank you, sir. And you, and part of our, well, you're the applicant, so I don't have to worry about the address. But would you be willing to, is there any members of the commission that would have any questions for the applicant? Mr. Hinckley, go right ahead.
Through this and trying to understand, it says in the report, when lot 2 is developed, the new owners will drill an individual well and install a septic tank and leach field, leaving me wondering, what about lot 3? If I understood this correctly, there's one existing residence with septic, and there will at the end of this be 3. So is the intention to drill a lot and well on lot 3 as well?
Not at this time, no.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Gertz.
So I believe maybe that was written. So when the application was originally submitted, it was submitted as a 2-lot subdivision. But through the process, the applicant decided they wanted to add a 3rd lot. So I think it was just that carried over from the original application that said 2 lots. so there was only going to be a 2-lot at the time, so it didn't include the 3rd lot. So that's, I think that's what happened there, so.
But clearly they will be able to drill their own well and build a house and, right, put in a septic.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hinckley. And thank you, Mr. Gertz, for answering that question. Ms. Hanny, any questions for the applicant?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm all set. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Spiegelberg?
None.
Okay, and none for myself. So thank you very much. At this point, I'm going to open up the application to comments from the public. And again, please state your name and your address. And if you would put your hand up on the participation list, and I'll call on you and let you go, and I'll give members of the public here a few minutes to, or not a few minutes, I'll check it here for a few seconds and then we'll move on. Seeing no hands up, we'll go ahead and close this to the public at this point. And so let's see. So at this point, we're going to have to do this as Mr. Hinckley had stated earlier that, or Mr. Gertz, you can help me on this. How would you like us to proceed on this? Would you like us to make a motion for the variance first, then the subdivision, or would you like us to incorporate that in with the motion? And what would you prefer or like to see, I guess?
Why don't you go ahead and just amend the staff report to approve the variance, or to add the variance approval in the findings. And then once you've made that motion, then make a motion to recommend approval. And then any contingencies like Mr. Hinckley had brought up, just add that to the end of that. So.
Thank you, Mr. Gertz. I'm looking for a motion from members of the commission for a variance in the findings of fact. Go ahead. You had your hand up, Mr. Hinckley. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can do that. I move that we approve the variance substituting a drainage corridor for a drainage easement as outlined on the preliminary and final plat, and change the findings of fact accordingly.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Hinckley. Do I have a second?
I would so second.
So we got a second from Mr. Spiegelberg on that. And so I'll go ahead and call roll on this. Mr. Hinckley?
Aye.
Ms. Hanning?
Aye.
Mr. Spiegelberg?
Aye.
And Chairman Moore, myself, aye. And so let's change that in the findings of fact if that's been updated to our findings. And now we'll move on to the actual motion for either approval or denial or continuance with this application. And before we do that, I did want to ask a question of the commission. How does everybody feel about the fire warden and the may waive that requirement? Do we want to put that in the motion? Mr. Hinckley, your hand's up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess what I heard from the earlier discussion is that the motion would be that we approve this contingent upon the fire warden waiving the fire safety requirements, if that works for you guys at the planning office.
That sounds very good. Do you want to make that motion?
Sure. I move that we approve the application as submitted, contingent upon waiver of fire safety requirements by the fire warden.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Mr. Hinckley. I just got to thinking, do we want to word it that way where it's contingent upon waiver, or acknowledging that the fire marshal has the right to waiver? And that's just a question of Mr. Gertz. Maybe you can expand on that.
So I guess a couple things. If we could include the findings of fact and conclusions of laws is in the staff report. And, I apologize. I usually send out a script that has some of this language in there, which I did not, so I apologize. But if we could change that to include that, and then just do it contingent upon approval of the waiver by the fire warden, and that would be sufficient. The fire warden's in our office. He's just not in here very often, so I'll just track him down. There won't be any problems with getting the waiver. So
was the motion in order as I said it then?
I think,
if you included, yeah,
I need to include.
go ahead, Mr.
including the findings of fact and conclusions of law stated in the staff report. That's the only phrase that we didn't have in there.
All right, I'll amend my motion then to include. Okay, let's start over. The motion would be to approve the preliminary and final plat as submitted, contingent upon receipt of a waiver from the fire warden, and including that contingency in the findings of fact. I kind of stumbling around here a little bit, but what works?
No, you're doing really good. Thank you. Thank you. I think, Mr. Gertz, is that gonna be sufficient?
Yeah, that's fine.
A motion for, motion for approval based on the findings of fact and conclusions of law. I'm not making this, I'm just kind of reorganizing it a little bit. Conditioned upon approval from the fire marshal. Does that sound correct? Fire warden, excuse me. Fire warden. Joe, sorry about that. Okay, very good. So we have a motion from Commissioner Hinckley for approval. Do we have a second?
I would so second.
Mr. Spiegelberg went ahead and seconded that. So we'll go ahead and vote here. Mr. Hinckley? Aye. Ms. Hanning?
Aye.
Mr. Spiegelberg?
Aye.
And Commissioner Moore, myself, aye. Motion passes and we'll move on to the Board of County Commissioners. Thank you for that. Thanks to the applicants for both applications here today. We're going to move on back to our agenda here, getting through those two public applications. The other item that we're going to visit about today was brought to us is our next meeting, which is March 10th, 2021 at 2 p.m. But Mr. Commissioner Hinckley wanted to kind of expand on this a little bit and just have some discussion. So let's go ahead and have a little bit of discussion. Mr. Hinckley, go ahead. The floor is yours. Tell us what you're thinking, and we'll just kind of have a discussion with the four of us. And if Mr. Kennedy gets back on, we'll allow him to speak too. So go ahead, Mr. Hinckley.
I guess we're gaining on it, Chairman Moore. We were 3 before, and now we're 4. We'd hope to have a full discussion, so maybe again we'll have to just kind of lay it out. But it's good to have Commissioner Spiegelberg here. One of the things we discussed was the issue of afternoon meetings versus evening meetings, and as we move forward, what do we want to do to perhaps be more accommodating to the public? It was pointed out at the last meeting that we've ended up at 2 o'clock for 2 reasons. One was COVID, and the other was trying to accommodate particularly Commissioners Cunningham and Spiegelberg, who need to drive home after the meeting, and sometimes that's late at night. So I guess I would just be interested in where the commissioners were on the subject of changing our meetings back to the traditional time in an evening in the interest of accommodating the public. This was the first item on my list.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hinckley. Ms. Hanning, do you have any comments or questions, or floor is yours?
Oh, I just would say that I'm certainly open to moving the time if it seems like there's a better time that would offer the public more of a chance to participate. I don't know what the previous time was before it became a 2 o'clock time. And I know under consideration is just safety of travel of the commissioners. And so I don't know if there's a compromise point. I know that for the city planning meetings, 4:30 was a pretty reasonable time to meet because people could knock off work a little bit early to come to the meeting if they needed to. Members of the public had probably already gotten their kids from school. But I would say also that Zoom, I think, has really created a flexible opportunity for the public to come in at various times of day and sit there with their screen muted until it's their turn. And so Zoom, I think, is a brand new avenue for including the public. So I don't have a strong opinion. I myself am flexible, but I am very for whatever we can do to include more public involvement.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ms. Hanning, for your comments. Mr. Spiegelberg?
Yeah, I fully appreciate this lady's statement about her flexibility. You may be trying to accommodate the public, but on the other hand, it's not just to accommodate me. I have to travel from here to Rock River. And let me tell you, it is very dangerous. There's a tremendous amount of game on the road after dark, winter and summer. You also have people who live up in what they call the North Laramie area, north of Rock River, who regularly like to attend these meetings, especially regarding the wind turbine issues and so forth. They have to travel almost an hour just from the North Laramie to get to Rock River, and then almost another hour to get to Laramie. They sit in a meeting for several hours. Some of those people cannot get back to their homes till midnight. So it's not just about me, it's accommodating people too. And these people live out in the county. And this basically is what this commission is about. It's not about the city of Laramie's convenience. We represent everyone, including residents of the city. But 90% of these issues involve, they're out in the county. And it is, this item was already cut and dried and voted on quite some time ago. And the idea of the 2 o'clock meeting in the winter time was so we could get a meeting going at 2, maybe with 1 till 4 or 5. And many times we're still driving home in the dark. It's not fun. There's elk, there's deer, there's antelope, and there's every trip. I count 1, 2, 3 antelope, especially in an area where you're not expecting them. But the reason for moving the meetings in the summer up to 4 o'clock, yes, it does stay lighter. I don't have a problem with that, but I do have a problem. I have attended 80 meetings in a little over 8 years, and I have not gotten a dime's worth of gas. That is on me. If you add up the round trips and stuff, it's pretty costly. That is my idea of serving my community. But you brought up an interesting point. This Zoom stuff and some of the other recent meetings we've had, especially like with the rail tie issue and stuff, we've had a much better attendance by Zoom than we do in these face-to-face meetings. So I agree with you. I think I'm not saying I'm the last voice in this, but you would, if let's just reverse this. If you wanted to have a later meeting, would you agree to drive up to Rock River and start a meeting at 7 o'clock and drive home in a blizzard? I don't think you'd be agreeable to that. And I'm not going to risk my life. I'm not going to budge on that.
Well, thank you, Mr. Spiegelberg. So I guess I'll give my 2 cents here. And so I'll give kind of a little bit of a history on it. We did move the meetings originally when I joined the Planning Commission, which would have been 8 years ago. And that was the same time as Mr. Spiegelberg. Our meetings were at 7 o'clock on Wednesdays. And sometimes they would get a little long, and I think at the end of the day too, I think we have to be very vigilant about, public comment, because I think that's what our role is and everything is being available to hear comments from the public. And, sometimes I think when you have the meetings at 7 o'clock, at the end of a long work day, not only for us, but for the public too, it gets a little difficult. And I'm not saying I'm not opposed to changing the meeting times, but I'm only be willing to change the meeting times
when we get more in the spring and summer and we have more daylight, for John to drive back, because John is a valued member of this commission, just as you guys are. I think, you know, we're very fortunate that the county commissioners at some point have all appointed us to be here. And so I think, in my opinion, I think for the time being, for March, I think 2 p.m. would be appropriate. I think we put out there enough information for the public to know how to join. And as Ms. Hanning did say, you know, this really has changed our meetings a lot, where you had to be here at 7, you know, before we had to be at the courthouse at 7 o'clock. And now, you know, we can meet over Zoom, and members of the public can too. So that's kind of nice, and they can come. And one thing that's really nice about the Zoom too, and this is just my observation, and I'm just kind of spitballing here, but what's really nice about it is people can jump on and jump off. And you know, when we had our meetings at the courthouse, you know, if you ended up being the last one and we had 5 or 6 applications, or if we did APOZ regulations or subdivision regulations or zoning, which we have done in the past, individuals would have to sit there for quite a while before they were able to be heard. And so I would prefer, and I do want to hear, you know, I did kind of hear from you guys, but also too, we can get this kind of nailed down. I would prefer to have it at 2 p.m. for March at least, and probably April, and then maybe in the months of May, June, July, August, when we have a lot more sunlight. You know, the roads are better. I think it's not only beneficial to Mr. Spiegelberg and having him at our meetings. You know, it's a lot better when we have a full commission than if we just have 4 of us or 3 of us. And then move them to a later time period during that time. And then again, maybe move them back earlier as we go back in the fall and lose daylight. And that's just my 2 cents. I see Mr. Kennedy did rejoin us, and so I'm going to give him an opportunity to talk here. Mr. Kennedy, what we're discussing right now is just the meeting times and what your thoughts on what are and what's best for the public and what's best for our commission, you know, what's best for the county in general. So floor is yours, sir. Go ahead.
Thanks, Sean. I would tend to agree with you on the back the time a little bit later in May, perhaps. And I think we've seen a change in public interaction since we've switched this format. And I think it's worthwhile to remember for Bern and Mara that this is actually the first time that we've had Zoom where we could see anyone else. Up until now, this has essentially been a conference call. And I'd agree with Sean on that, especially if, let's say that we do end up beginning to meet in person in the fall. I actually think this is probably an easier format for much of the public. And when we think about some of the other folks, the engineers, surveyors, or so on, that might be there with an applicant as well, it's going to lessen the cost for those folks to be able to attend virtually, and let alone the amount of time that might be involved with travel if somebody chose to employ a firm in Cheyenne or Casper as well. So there's a lot of benefit to our applicants to keep this kind of format available, even if we do meet in person. I personally would like to see us go ahead and set a time through the end of the year. And I can't remember the publication notice on regular meetings, but I would be pretty comfortable with meeting at 2 o'clock in March and April, and then move back to 4 o'clock, let's say in May through August, and then go back in September when the days start to shorten up a bit. I hope I'm.
Nope, appreciate your comments, Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Spiegelberg, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I had one more thing to add. It's not only the road conditions, it's not only the game at night, but we have to go, we hope the gate is up when we get out there before it turns off and goes down to 34 to Wheatland.
Mhm.
I personally have a travel pass number that I had to apply for, and I can call YDOT and get a password. So far, I have driven back in many storms when they push people back, and they'll let me go because I have the password. But if I get turned back, where do I go? To a motel? I'm not going to do that. And years ago, I remember when Jerry Kennedy was a county commissioner, many of his winter meetings were conducted by telephone, clear up there in the North Laramie. I was to several county commissioner meetings. So I think, I just think that the people up north deserve a fair shake too, as far as travel time goes. They come in with some very good comments from time to time. Yeah. And so I just wanted to add that, but we're at the mercy of that gate, and you can either go if you have the pass, if they give you a password, but they can still stop you.
Yeah.
So that's one of my concerns.
Sure.
Yeah.
And thank you for that. And then I'm going to circle back around because everybody's talked. And so Mr. Hinckley here in a second.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Gertz.
Yeah, I'll just note that in March, I'd appreciate that we do keep it at 2 o'clock just because we have applications in the process now and they've been notified of that time. So after that, we're fine. But as for our office, we would like to keep it at 2 just because of the applications that are kind of in the process.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the other thing is we probably do have an option if the commission would like to meet in the Board of County Commissioners room. We have that option. It's not necessary. We can continue to do what we're doing right now while the the pandemic and the COVID stuff's still going on. But I just wanted to bring that up. If anybody wanted to do that, I would just have to make arrangements with our IT department and get things set up that way. The Board of County Commissioners are meeting in person. That's not meaning they are having public there. It's usually just the Board of County Commissioners and staff, but that is an option that can be discussed if anybody is interested in that at some point. So I just wanted to bring up those two things.
Well, thank you, Mr. Gertz. What I was going to add too is back to Mrs. Hanning's comment was, Zoom has really changed a lot of things in the availability for people to be at our meetings. And when we do at some point get back together and are meeting in the commissioner's room, it'll be nice for the public. I think it's just another avenue for the public to be able to join our meetings without having to be here. And so, so that's my 2 cents. Mr. Hinckley, do you have any other comments?
I totally agree with that. And if there's anything good that'll come out of this horrid pandemic, it'll be our exposure to alternate ways of meeting. And I applaud what everyone said. I do look forward to the time, and we should, as soon as we can get past COVID, meet in person. And yeah, thanks for the broad discussion. A question I guess I would have for our more rural representatives: what is the Zoom availability? I guess. John, Keith, you live out outside the borders. I mean, is it feasible for folks to Zoom in from these more remote locations?
Two things. I've actually been on Zoom for almost 3 years now because I used it for work long before this started. And my biggest frustration right now is I have 8 different remote meeting platforms on my computer. And when things slow down, there's going to be some that disappear. But if you have reasonable 4G cell service, you can do that from your cell phone quite readily. I talked with, actually it was right at a year ago now, I actually reported to one of my clients for their meeting via Zoom on my phone from remote northwestern Missouri. I did have to stop and find a good cell service, but they had a video and audio feed in Powell, and no interruptions or problems. And I'm on my internet service that I have out in the county from VistaBeam, and I actually did kick the speed up last week because we had I had family here, and I had a grandson who was in school, and his mom was actually doing her title company work from here. So we had 3 running full time and didn't have any problem. I did prioritize myself though, but that's going to get better. And I think that's something else we need to remember, because that's some of the initiatives that the governor's working on now, is more broadband out in the country too, and make that more readily available, whether that's, it might be library or whatever, but we've got really good speed here, actually better than some places in town.
Yeah, that's for sure. Mr. Kennedy, probably better than I have here in town. Ms. Hanning, anything else you want to add?
Mr. Chair, thank you. I just want to thank Mr. Spiegelberg for his comments, because I do think thinking about people way out in the hinterlands is important to factor in, and just based on the difficulty that the school district has had with remote distance learning, I think the county has a long way to go on making sure everybody has the internet that they need to be able to participate in a process like this remotely. And that until that goal is achieved through the processes that are ongoing that Mr. Kennedy mentioned, that we should probably err on the side of giving people out in the hinterland safe time of day to travel. And to that end, I would suggest not only keeping it at 2 o'clock for March, but perhaps April. I feel like we're getting more of our winter storms in the spring these days, big, heavy, wet storms that close things down fast. So I would just throw out maybe 2 o'clock through April would be something to consider.
Thank you, Ms. Hanning. Mr. Hinckley, sorry to me to interrupt you. You asked that question and I moved on to Keith and Ms. Hanning, but did you have any follow-up to that?
No, I appreciate that feedback, and I'm totally with Keith. The wave of the future is in internet connection. I think that's what's going to save the Wyoming economy, is the ability of people who can do their work on Manhattan living out in Bosler and Wamsutter. So yeah, I think that's where we're headed, and appreciate that feedback. So yeah, good discussion. I certainly wouldn't object to some kind of a scaled meeting time. Again, I personally, I'd like those later meetings because then it doesn't interrupt my day as much, and I'm in the same boat as a lot of folks that are here in the city. So yeah, the ideas that have been floating around, maybe we move it to 4:30 later in the year. I appreciate Commissioner Kennedy's notion of let's maybe lock something down rather than just kind of winging it. So no, thank you for the discussion. I think it was fully appropriate.
Okay, so if this is okay with the commission, for March, we will keep the meeting at 2 p.m. For April, we will keep the meeting at 2 p.m. And for the month of May, do we have suggestions for 4:30?
4 p.m.
Mr. Spiegelberg says 4.
Sean,
go ahead, Mr. Kennedy.
Sean, I'd like to make this formal, and there's a reason for that. Now I'll make the motion and explain after a second. I move that we meet at 2 p.m. in March and April, and then we meet at 4 o'clock for May, June, July, and August, and then return to 2 o'clock meeting September through next January. And the reason for that is that way Dave can let applicants know when they can be expected to appear. And let's say they want to make sure they get things right, and they've talked to him 2 or 3 months before they actually file an application. That way they know when their application is complete, when they need to be there.
Okay, so
Thanks.
we have currently have a motion for Mr. Kennedy for the time set. Do we have a second?
I would second that.
Mr. Spiegelberg seconds that. Let's go ahead and have discussion now. And I'll start, Mr. Hinckley. Any comments on that?
No, I can live with that.
Okay, very good. Ms. Hanning?
Comment?
Okay, very good. Keith, I'm not going to ask you because you made the motion. John, you seconded it, so it sounds like.
I'm good.
Okay, and so I'll go ahead and take a vote. Mr. Hinckley? Ms. Hanning?
Aye.
Mr. Kennedy?
Aye.
Mr. Spiegelberg?
Aye.
And Chairman Moore and myself, aye. So, Mr. Gertz, do you have those times down that Keith made that motion?
Yes, I mean, I can reiterate, March and April, 2 p.m., May through August, all those meetings, 4 p.m., September through January, 2 p.m.
Okay, very good. Very good. Good discussion. One last thing before we get off here is a citizen comment. Oh, hold on. I see up a hand up by Ms. Curran. Ms. Curran, do you have something to add?
I do, Chairman Moore, thank you. I just wanted to let you know that I was able to speak with Peggy Trent, the county attorney, and she said that your commission can certify the IPOZ regulations to the commissioners today, and then it can go to them, and then they'll put it out for their 45-day comment. So your prior motion with the or provision in it has been answered.
Thank you, Ms. Curran. So, commissioners, so just so we all have the understanding is the APOZ regulations that were provided to us by Mr. Gertz in the packet will move on to the Board of County Commissioners, and they'll give us direction. Thank you, Ms. Curran. The last thing here is citizen comment. Do we have any non-agenda related topics from the public that would want to be addressed here at this meeting? And I'll give a few minutes to see hands up. Again, put your hands up and I'll call on you, and please state your name, your address, and give you the opportunity to speak. Not seeing any hands up, we'll go ahead and adjourn this regular meeting. Do I have a motion from any commission members or?
So moved.
Mr. Chairman, I was going to ask Mr. Hinckley.
Hold on one second. Well, there's a motion.
I'm sorry.
Motion on the table.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr.
I don't want to adjourn yet until I ask that question.
That's okay. Mr. Kennedy, you can help me with this. You made the motion to adjourn the meeting, but Mr. Spiegelberg has some more discussion that.
I'll withdraw the motion and go ahead, John.
Okay, so a little bit more, dialogue here. Mr. Spiegelberg, the floor is yours.
Well, first of all, I felt a feeling of cooperation today among all the members, especially the new members, and I do appreciate that. And I am totally committed to see that something gets done before a horrific spill happens in that telephone canyon. Mr. Hinckley, do you agree with me that that is the paramount risk to our water supply?
No. No, it really is. It's kind of a classic case of one big one or lots of little ones. One of the earlier meetings on this, I think it was Mark Jenkins that brought in the phrase "death by a million cuts," versus getting caught in a tree shredder. They're really two quite different things going on with the aquifer, in my opinion. And one is the exposure to a catastrophic accident on I-80. And the other is just the much less kind of dramatic catch the headlines drip, drip, drip of development. And that's there's no one thing you can say, okay, this guy over fertilized his lawn, we're all going to die. That never happens that way. But no, I think the accumulation that is controlled by careful land use planning and zoning is a significant source of aquifer contamination to which we should turn our attention. So I don't know which one's paramount. Not sure that the question is terribly meaningful, but by no means would I suggest that we drop our duty to the citizens of Albany County in and out of the city with respect to their water supply to turn all of our attention to the possibility of an accident on I-80.
Thank you, Mr. Hinckley. Mr. Spiegelberg, do you have?
Yeah, I appreciate your comments, Mr. Hinckley. I think we all want good water. That's a given. But if you look at the volume, the mere volume of petroleum or chemicals, I mean, you're looking at thousands and thousands and thousands of gallons. What happens if 2 or 3 of these tankers collide? It's destroyed our water unless you've got safeguards in place. That's my view. I don't think you're going to destroy our aquifer overnight. There's a constant suspect attitude towards wells and septics, but we all have to go and get a well permit from the state. We have to totally comply. And I don't know, to me, the I-80 Canyon thing is still very paramount compared to contamination from septics or wells. That's my own opinion.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hinckley.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Hinckley. I think that, I don't necessarily want to get in a big discussion at this point. We're into this meeting. We can go ahead and move on and adjourn the meeting, but I think maybe that's just, we're going to have a meeting maybe next month or, in the coming months, especially after these regulations hit the board of county commissioners and we get public comment. I think we're gonna have plenty of time for discussion on APOZ regulations. So I did tell Mr. Spiegelberg that, we certainly can put the I-80 corridor onto next month's agenda and, just resubmit that letter to all the agencies out there that we sent it to before and make them know that, we are concerned and would just like them to know if there's anybody they need to talk to, they certainly talk to our commission and what our concern is with that. With that being said, let's go ahead and get go ahead.
Well, yeah, just a very quick clarification of what you just said. I guess that I stumbled there for a minute. It seems to me what we just did was we certified a set of APOZ regulations to the county commission. Yes. Your statement suggested you thought that we were still in that game. You're thinking they might send it back to us, but if I'm understanding what we did today, we may never see APOZ regulations again. Is that correct?
Mr. Hinckley, that's and thank you for clarifying for me. I was kind of rambling a little bit there. Yeah, we certainly could see it. We certainly might not see it, but I think that on this commission, as long as I've been on this commission for the last 8 years, whether it's been on our agenda or not, there's always been discussion on it. And I think that that's part of the purpose of our commission. And I think that's, just part of, the wellhead protection program and the delineation line. And so it's something that's always going to come around, but also too, in the weeks that follow, if there is yourself or Ms. Hanning, if you have any questions or if there's something that you'd like to specifically see on the agenda, certainly reach out and we can have David put that on the agenda for discussion or whatever we might need. But you're absolutely right. We may never see him again. We might see him again, but that doesn't mean that we can't have discussion on it.
They're always on the agenda.
It's been on the agenda for years. So
sure. Thank you.
But that's okay. So very good. Thanks for clarifying me there, Mr. Hinckley. So at this point, let's go ahead and adjourn this meeting. Mr. Kennedy, do you want to go ahead and move your motion forward again?
I move that we adjourn this meeting of the Albany County Planning and Zoning Commission.
All right. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
A second from Mr. Spiegelberg. And I'll go ahead and take the vote here. Mr. Hinckley?
Aye.
Ms. Hanning?
Aye.
Mr. Kennedy,
Aye.
Mr. Spiegelberg,
Aye.
and Chairman Moore, myself, aye. Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
And Mr. Hinckley and Ms. Hanning, I do want to thank you for your meetings here today. You did a very nice job and look forward to working with you guys in the future. Take
Thank you,
care.
Mr. Chair.
So-
Likewise.